From Atlanta, Georgia, welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast for women on leadership and life skills with Rhea Story. Rhea shares powerful life and leadership principles, helping you maximize your potential and become the woman God created you to be.
Today we're talking about intentional thinking. It's probably one of my favorite topics because the power of our thoughts and the thoughts that we intentionally think about cannot be overstated in terms of what it can do for our potential, both in life and leadership. So I've always been a thinker, but I really didn't realize how powerful it was to intentionally direct thoughts in a specific direction until probably about 2012 or 2013. A couple of examples I can think back over life where I was always thinking about, achieving a goal and thinking about that and how to do it and how to achieve it. And I would. I can remember jogging around, going out for a run and thinking about, oh, I want this specific job and how do I get that specific job? And then, less than a year later, I was working in the job that I'd been thinking about while running. But I really wasn't doing that intentionally. It wasn't like I was thinking on purpose for a purpose, sitting down going, how can I change my life by changing my thoughts? I really didn't realize the power of doing that until probably 2013. And I was remember because I was at a leadership conference and I was listening to John Maxwell speak. And John Maxwell is a very popular leadership speaker and writer. He's got, 80 something, 90 something books on leadership. And so I was taking notes while he was talking, and I still have that journal where I was taking notes. And he was talking about intentional thinking. He really didn't call it that, but he was talking about, thinking on purpose. And he shared with us that every year since he was 17, he has read one book. And the book was called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And so I wrote that down and I thought, wow, that must be a pretty profound book. If someone like John Maxwell is reading that book, not just once, but reading it once a year, every year, and he's like 70 years old now. Every year he's read this book since he was 17. It must be a really incredible book. And I couldn't wait to get home and get on Amazon and order it. And the book came in. I was so excited, to get the package in and open it up and be like, wow, this is going to be a fabulous book. And it completely shocked me because the book, the version I have, is got big font and it's 38 pages. With big font, it's 38 pages. And I remember just feeling so puzzled because I was like, this is the profound, powerful book that John Maxwell reads every year. I'm like, how good can it be? It's only 38 pages. But it was interesting. When I read the book, I realized it is a very powerful book. And it's very really just talking about the thoughts that we have and their effect on our circumstances, their effect on us, their effect on our health and our body. And it really took me several readings to digest it and absorb it. And it is one of those books you can go back and read again and again because every time you read it, you're in a different place. And so you'll get different things out of it. It's kind of like reading the Bible over. You're just in a different place in your life. And so different things will resonate with you differently. Well, why is that all important to begin with? The thoughts that we think do influence us and they do determine us to some extent. I like to say it like this: the consequences of the thoughts that we think are the choices that we make. Because the thoughts that we think dictate how we feel, and that decides what we do, and that determines what we get, the results that we get. So I'm reading a pretty cool book. It's definitely got some science in it, but the not too sciencey parts that are just way over my head are pretty interesting and thought-provoking. The book is called Switch on Your Brain by Dr. Carolyn Leaf, and I really kind of stumbled on it by accident. But I love one of her points in here that she talks about. Research shows, and I'm quoting, research shows 75 to 98% of illness comes from thought. Now, let me break that down, and I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit, because some of you are thinking, wow, there is no way I thought my way into a head cold last week. But really, the thoughts that we think influence how we're feeling and what we do, and they influence our choices. And those choices determine as much as 75 to 90% of physical and mental illness or unwellness. Our thoughts and our choices really scientifically change the emotions, because they change the chemicals in our brain. And she's got Dr. Leaf has a ton of science and research studies in the book, but it's way over my head to be able to digest it all and break it down for you. But she summarizes it nicely in the book, and really talks about how that research supports that our thoughts that we think, intentionally directing our thoughts, actually change the chemical reaction in our brain. And that changes our body on a physiological level. Now, all of that is fascinating, and we can talk about that all day. But what that really means to you, and what it really means to me, is that we are influenced by our environment, but we are not determined by it, because true freedom exists in our mind. The freedom of the thoughts that we have, the freedom to choose our attitude, is going to determine our perspective, and that determines our outlook. I love that. This isn't anything new. Even the Bible talks about, in Matthew 6:25, don't worry about your life, what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink. Don't worry about what you're going to wear, because really, we spend a lot of time and a lot of energy worrying about the future. And most of that is things that we can't control anyway. And so we end up just spinning our wheels and wasting our precious time and energy and our precious thoughts on things we can't control. So worry about anything doesn't really help us. It doesn't really move forward. So what I really want to talk about today is, how do we change our thinking to serve us better, rather than worry or fear, rather than those negative thoughts that keep us stuck anytime we're not happy with where we are. How do we change our thinking? How do we think intentionally to move forward, to move to a better place, to move to a different environment, a better situation? Negative thoughts are, just the thoughts that we think to ourselves. Negative thoughts that we think are kind of like, coming up to someone and getting right up in their face, like 6 inches away, like, close enough to tell what they had for lunch by smelling their breath, getting right up in their face and yelling at them. And that person, more than likely, is immediately going to get defensive, and they're going to start yelling back, right? I mean, that's just a normal reaction. And when we think negative thoughts to ourselves, it's kind of like that. We immediately put ourselves on the defensive. When we start attacking ourselves with negative thinking, we immediately have to go on the defensive. And the problem is that when we're in a defensive state, it's counterproductive to problem solving. And I don't know about you, but my life certainly has problems. Even when we do make the right choices and we do things great, we're still going to encounter problems. We're still going to have situations that can go wrong or end up like we didn't want, or what we didn't plan, or what we didn't hope for sometimes. So the question is, how can we intentionally think about it? And how can we use the power of that intentional thinking to move forward? So I like to break it down like this. There are 3 key things to think about whenever we find ourselves in a situation that we're stuck in, whether that's physically stuck, maybe we made the wrong choice about a career move. I've done that in the past. And, now it's like, how do I think about how I can change my job situation? Maybe it's the wrong move on a personal level. Maybe it's the wrong decision that we made. There's so many options where sometimes the situations and the messes that we have in our life are situations that we created through choices we made. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes hardships just happen and we find ourselves faced with a challenging situation, and it's thinking about how can we move forward through that, even if it's just emotionally, and maybe not physically. So I like to break this down because I'm a pretty visual person. So I write this down in the way of 3 boxes. If you have a big piece of paper in front of you, go on and write down 3 big squares in a line on your piece of paper there. And the first one is right in that box, write down, think about reality. And then right in that box or around that box or even beside it, think about what is the reality of the situation, because positive thinking and optimistic thinking doesn't mean that we ignore reality. It's writing down the facts or thinking about the facts and saying, okay, this is how it really is. I don't want to, stick my head in the sand and pretend that life is good when it's not, but come face to face with the reality of the situation. So think about reality, number 1. And the second box, write down thinking about options. And right in this box or beside it is going to go all of the options that you have to move forward. So, a couple of years ago, several years ago, really, Mac and I both of us had started a journey of going into speaking and writing, and we'd both left great careers, cashed in our 401k in retirement, and, resigned from those careers on purpose to pursue what we consider a calling. And, to begin with, we didn't have any clients. We didn't have a client base. We didn't have a social network. We certainly didn't have podcasts like this or books. And what we realized, the town we were living in at the time was a fairly small town. And we'd been there for many years. We had bought a house there, and we loved the house. We had a pool. We had a hot tub. And we'd already made some sacrifice decisions in terms of growing our business, and we'd sold some cars and downsized our lifestyle, and those were not bad things. They were really intentional decisions to help us move forward and grow the business. And we came to a point where we realized that the city we were living in, number 1, it was a small town. It really was limiting our business options because it's harder to meet new people and potential clients if you're in a small town. And it also was several hours away from one of the bigger airports. So that meant that anytime we had to travel, it meant, spending another couple extra hours driving to the airport and then traveling somewhere. And we came to the realization that being in that house and that town was holding us back from where we wanted to go. And so we started thinking about the options. And one option, if we wanted to continue to move forward and grow the business, was selling the house. Now, that doesn't mean you have to act on all of these options right now. Just sit down and brainstorm on what are the options that I have, even if you don't like them, even if they don't look like great solutions. Just sit down and think about what are the options that I have in this situation. Is this an option? Is this an option? What could I do? Don't worry right now about, is this the best decision? Is this the one decision? Or is this the action I need to take? Just brainstorm on all of the possibilities. I call this possibility thinking. Doesn't mean you got to act on it right now. You're not necessarily getting married to this solution. Just think about it as a possibility. And then that brings us to the third box, of course, which is thinking about actions. This is where we decide a course of action. This is where we choose our way forward. Out of all of those possibilities you brainstormed on, which one is most likely to be a good, effective solution? How likely is it that you're going to carry through with it? Think about the consequences, potentially good consequences and potentially negative consequences of those opportunities you wrote down. And then choose the one that best fits you. This is why I love doing this process, whether you do it informally or even just sit down and think about it. You don't have to write it down to actually do it. But these 3 steps are so powerful in helping us find our solution. And, I'm not a big fan of giving people advice because, I can't give them the one best solution that fits your situation and your environment and your circumstance. So I really hesitate to give people advice because I might choose a different solution than really is the best one for them. But if you follow these 3 steps to sit down and think about these 3 things, think about reality, think about your options, and then think about the action you need to take. And then act on it. Just take that action. But if you do this, this will help empower you to think about the solution that really fits you best. Sometimes it's just the little things that hold us back from taking action. But if we sit down and get very intentional about thinking about our situation and how to solve it, this becomes a very powerful tool. And you can apply this model to just about any situation. You can think about the future. Think about your current reality. Think about where you want to go. Think about the options to get there. And think about the one course of action you need to take. It's incredibly clarifying. And, we don't do enough thinking. Most of us are busy. I talk about a lot of times where, and I'm sure I've heard it somewhere because it's too good. It's got to be a quote that I've read or heard someone else say. So much of the time, we are so busy as a human doing that we forget to be a human being. And taking time away, even just a few minutes every day, to really think on purpose, intentional thinking. I'm going to share a quote with you that Marianne Williamson had, and that's not the one that most of us think about that we know about our deepest fear. This is in her book, A Return to Love, and she I quote, "Changing our lives can be difficult. For a person who's been diagnosed with a physical ailment, the call to change is imperative. Where we used to eat unhealthy foods, we must now eat healthy ones. Where we used to smoke or drink or get too little sleep, we must now change those habits. And where our minds used to run instinctively in the directions of fear, paranoia, and attack, we must now do everything possible to train our minds to think differently." And I love that because it is so powerful. It really is training our mind. When we find ourselves focusing on fear or worry or something that we can't control, it really is training our mind to mentally sit down and go, okay, let me think about reality, think about my options, and think about the actions I need to take. And this process, it's so simple but so powerful in helping us gain emotional control over our situation. Doesn't mean it's going to solve it overnight, doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but it really just raises our awareness. And that's the key. Raising our awareness about our options and our opportunities, and then that will help us take action. Daniel Goleman says, self-awareness is recognizing a feeling as it happens, and it's the keystone of emotional intelligence. It really comes down to just being intentional, because that's the power to change our world. We don't have to wait on circumstances to get better or anybody else to do it. We don't have to wait on a perfect time or a better time or the right time. It's really sitting down and saying, what can I do with what I've been given? Until next time.
Start increasing your influence and maximizing your potential with Ria's audiobooks. Available at audible.com, amazon.com, and iBooks. Please visit riastory.com to learn about Ria's books, resources, speaking, and training programs. Thanks for listening.